Hello and welcome to The High Road. My name is Noel C. Blundell and today I'm your host. Today we have a special guest, a lifelong resident of Latrobe Valley, tireless promoter of the region, highly regarded in business and community, a Grand Master with Freemasons Australia, and a recipient of the Order of Australia Medal for recognition for his work in the local community. Welcome, Richard Elkington. Welcome and thank you for being on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Noel.
Thank you very much. It's an honour, actually.
Really?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have a bit of a chat today about your experience and life in Latrobe Valley.
And I ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Else. I'm staying right
You're
here.
staying right here. So where'd you grow up?
Well, my parents had emigrated from Scotland in 1949. They went via various places like Sydney and Brisbane and ended up working. My father ended up working for the SEC in the construction of the housing estates in East and North Newborough. My grandfather had arrived about 12 months earlier doing similar work. And so I was born in Yallourn in November 1950.
Wow.
And so I was here for, I think, about 3 years.
That's integral to the history of the region,
Yes.
really.
Yeah, there's a story there too, actually. And then my parents went back to Scotland in 53, late 52 or 53 with my little brother and myself.
For a visit to visit the family.
No, we stayed for 2 years. I'm pretty sure, something I never explored with my father, but I recall there was a credit squeeze in 1952, and that's when the Morwell project, the construction of Morwell Briquette factory and Morwell power station, that ceased for a number of years because of the shortage of finance. So my parents went back to Scotland and then came back in 1955.
That's amazing, actually, because most of the immigrants that come out to build the infrastructure of Australia, or Victoria, Australia, throughout the 50s, post-Second World War, stayed.
Absolutely.
I've never heard of a story of someone returning and then...
Going and then coming back again.
Yes.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Because I was an Australian citizen, wasn't I?
Yes. Yeah.
So was my little brother. We're Australian citizens.
Well, yes. So, but let's just touch on that for a second. And after a few 2 or 3 years in Scotland, return to Scotland.
Yep.
You come back to Australia, but right back to Newborough.
To Maui, actually. We lived in Prince Street in Maui. In Housing Commission housing. Yep. Different society then. They were placed, the whole area was just full of people who'd emigrated from all sorts of places, mostly employed by the SEC.
Yes.
I went to school at Elizabeth Street in the year it opened.
Oh, okay.
In 1956. I was in grade 1 in 56.
It's the year the Olympics are here.
I stayed 56, 57, and I think in 58 we moved to Newborough. 58. So when I was born, my parents lived in Delburn Street, East Newborough, then moved to Monash Road, and then we went back to Scotland, and then we came back and we lived in Maui, then Newborough again. By that time, my grandfather was a teacher at Yallourn Tech, a woodwork and solid geometry and technical drawing teacher at Yallourn Tech.
What schools did you go to?
I went to Elizabeth Street State School
As you
in
just
the
mentioned.
year it opened.
That's right. You just mentioned that. Sorry. I was referring more to secondary.
I remember Bloomfield was the Minister for Education. And then I went to Newborough East State School when we lived in Chamberlain Road in Newborough. I did grades 3 to 6 there. And then, in probably what was a wrong decision on my part, Well, yes and no. I went to your lawn tech, lawn technical school, because I probably wanted to be a carpenter like my grandfather.
Yep.
My father, by this stage, was a operator at your lawn power station. So I went to your lawn tech. I was dux of that. 3, 4, 5, with no manual dexterity at all.
Okay.
None. 0. Can't put a box together.
Okay.
I was dux of the school. The duxes of the tech school got a scholarship to become an engineer.
Okay, so you
I'd have preferred to have been a chemist, but there was no scholarships in chemistry.
Oh, I see.
So I did. Had a scholarship to do. I wanted to do electrical, but the guy from Morwell Tech, he wanted to do electrical, and Big Bill Schultz, who was head of DCC down here, his school got first choice, so I did mechanical, which was chosen for me, really.
There you go. That's fantastic. So you went on to university, obviously, because you're a Federation alumni member.
I am. Well, see, I went to Gippsland, your lawn tech, Gippsland Institute, and by the time I finished in 1970, at the tender age of, I think my last exam, I was 20 and 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so during the holidays, the SEC gave me employment work.
Yep.
All my fees were paid for, books, and I got holiday work, and I got a job. So I never had to look for a job, really. 4 days after my last exam, rocked up at your lawn power station as a cadet engineer.
So you had 4 days rest.
And then I was a cadet.
And straight into it.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Oh, I loved that place. Loved it.
That's amazing.
The old your lawn. It was like, emotional experience it was.
Okay, can you just unpack just quickly what your lawn is for those people who might
The
be
old your
listening
lawn
overseas?
power station.
Power, coal-fired power.
The old your lawn power station was, I think, the first the first generation from the old your lawn power station was in 1924. That was a station. So that was an old range power station where you had multiple boilers connected to a smaller number of turbo generators. Okay. That was added to in the 30s with B station, your lawn B.
Okay, yep.
Again, similar conceptually. Immediately after the war, there was C and D stations added, which was 6 boilers feeding into 2 turbo generators, each rated at about 60 megawatts. And then tacked onto the end of that commissioned in about 61, 62 was your lawn E station, which was the first unitised plant. So you had one boiler feeding into one turbo generator, and they were rated at about 120 megawatts, and then followed Hazelwood.
Okay.
So the exciting thing for me was, I did find it exciting actually, was the fact that people had walked that floor and given their lives really to work in the power industry, since the 1920s.
Yes.
And I used to use the term, there's a certain romance, emotion about the plant. It was really old style plant, highly manned, like lots of people. So you didn't get things done by pressing a button. You actually had to turn a valve.
Yep.
So
Took manpower.
Look at the colour of the fire and the boiler.
Yep.
And so it was highly people-oriented. So I liked that. There's lots of people there.
So they used to watch the colour of the fire in the boiler to see if it needed to be fed more, or reduced or increased.
More oxygen, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, you had other things to help determine
of course.
that. But essentially, that's
Yes.
what people did.
Yep.
You had coal being fed in through a coal handling plant, so the open cut fed into these bunkers, slot bunkers, and then from the slots it went through to the station bunkers and then down through the system where the coal was dried and then fired into the boiler. It was all heavily engineered, but it was all dependent on people doing things.
Yep.
I found that interesting, actually.
Very. What I find interesting is that you went to primary school in the region, then you went to high school, and you won a scholarship.
Yeah, become an engineer.
Become an engineer, and then come like 4 days off.
Yeah.
And then you were in the power plant.
Yep.
Engineering things.
Correct.
And that's the education system and the whole infrastructure of around the power stations were geared specifically to man the power stations.
Yes.
Is that and we have lost that. Is that correct?
Yes, these days you can actually operate a power station remotely if you really want to.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Through digital control. You could operate. It depends on how the valves and and the field devices, if you like, the things out in the field that have to change to vary conditions. Depends how efficiently they are. But in theory, you could operate the power stations remotely. Can't maintain them, but you can operate them. So that's how far we've travelled.
Yeah.
What cheeses me off, I suppose, about environmentalists is the wrong word, but extremists is, at every stage of the expansion of the power industry, they've become more efficient. And there was never a drive for efficiency in Victoria because the coal is so cheap, right? Okay. Scrape the surface basically, put the coal into the bunker, send it into the power station, reduce its particle size, then fire it into a boiler, high in moisture. But things like dust, far less of, infinitesimal compared to what they were.
Yep.
And so we've continually made improvements in the environmental performance of power station plant. That's what we've done.
Whilst feeding all of Victoria, some of New South Wales and South Australia with reliable, cheap, efficient electricity.
It was the cheapest electricity. I think it was second cheapest in the world, and certainly the cheapest in Australia. And of course, there's all sorts of fiddles in all of that. For example, there was a stage in the 90s where the state-owned generators in New South Wales were valuing their plant, right? And therefore their debt.
Yep.
So they were valuing their plant much lower than what the market would pay to buy it. And so they actually then claimed that they could produce electricity cheaper. But the cost of electricity from brown coal is extremely cheap.
Particularly here in Victoria.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I'll say it again, the drive for efficiency has never been there because the fuel cost is so low.
So there wasn't any economic pressure to find better ways to produce it?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
And so even in a place like Loy Yang A, yes, you wouldn't have efficiency of 30%. Don't get it because there's no drive, there's no economic driver to do it.
Yeah, okay. So you were there for quite some time. So what were some of the roles you had undertaken throughout your working career?
Well, started as a cadet, so I did 4 periods of 6 months roughly in various bits and pieces of the SEC, including 2 in Melbourne.
Oh.
I then came back.
Was that at head office or at Newport?
No, at head office basically.
Okay. Yep.
The most exciting place I ever worked was Planning and Investigations Department, which was looking at new power station developments.
Oh, okay.
Like years out.
Yep.
So I was aware, from 72 that that there was a nuclear power station site on French Island.
Okay.
Had been reserved. In fact, we used to have a nuclear investigations engineer in the SEC back in the early 70s, because that was seen as an option for expansion of the grid in Victoria.
Righto, and a broadening of power supply options.
Absolutely.
Yep.
We were very late as a state to adopt gas turbines. You'll recall, you will. You're old enough, I think. Certainly looking at to remember the big fight, political fight we had over Newport.
Yes.
Newport D. That was a gas thermal plant, still running actually.
Yes. Yep.
The unions wanted to banned it actually, I think the reason it was constructed was to probably break the power of the Latrobe Valley unions by having a plant in Melbourne.
Okay.
Very much lower manning.
And smaller in size and capacity.
Well, it was 500 megawatts.
Oh, really?
2 500 megawatt gas-fired units, meant to run 2 shifts a day, 5 days a week. We ended up, the SEC ended up only building 1 unit, and the second unit went to Loy Yang A.
Oh, okay.
Loy Yang A has 3 Siemens KWU turbo generators and 1 Brown Boveri 500 megawatt generator, which is different in construct because it was meant to operate differently.
Okay.
So that's why we've ended up with what we've got.
Yeah, okay.
So I grew up in the Latrobe Valley. I went to Hazelwood. SEC at the time tried to force me into mechanical maintenance because, in my view, power stations were built to be maintained, not operated.
Yep.
We had a terrible performance of power plants under the SEC. I mean, I remember, I think Loy Yang A was constructed. It was meant to run 75% available capacity factor. And we all sat back in wonderment, how the hell are we ever going to get 75%? How the hell are we ever going to get that? We're better, I think the ACF of Yallourn E was about 50, low 50s. Wasn't much better at Yallourn W. There's lots of reasons for that, which probably not helpful to go through today, but we had all sorts of restrictive practices, couldn't get contractors.
Okay.
So outages were very long indeed. And so I spent my life, my first management job was in 1980. In between, I'd stood for Parliament, for Macmillan, it's now Monash, in 1977. I'd stood for the council. I didn't find working for the SEC as a junior engineer to be particularly challenging. Didn't think it was very important. Nobody ever explained how important anything was.
Yep.
I was trying to be turned into something I'm not. So my head's in the strategic space, not in designing pieces of metal for something.
Yep. So that was the beginning of your community.
Yeah.
Work, was it your community interest in the community and the running of your...
So I was Derek Amos's campaign manager in 1979 when we got 81%.
81%?
In Yallourn North.
In an election?
Yeah.
Really?
In Yallourn North.
Wow.
So I remember all of that. And so once that was over, I ended up in Loy Yang liaison. So I was because my head's in the strategic space, not in the micro. I'm not a micromanager under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I can't put a box together. It doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
So I went Loy Yang liaison, which was liaising between the operations, the operators, and the design and project managers about what sort of plant we would get, how it was accessed, how it was maintained, so a lot of the workshops on site I had input to. Controls. That was really good. I enjoyed doing that for 2 years. Then I went to maintenance at Yallourn, where I sort of looked at things from a project management point of view rather than designing bits and pieces.
Okay.
And then I went from there to operations at Yallourn, which for me was the dream job.
The dream.
Only job I ever wanted.
Yep.
And then
Operations.
Operations, yep. Systems and processes rather than,
Yep.
and dealing through people.
Yep.
So then I replaced Frank Tomlinson, who was a legend in his own lifetime, at Yallourn Power Station. Yes, interesting story there.
Did they move him on into the infrastructure? Into
No,
the
what had
hierarchy,
happened?
or-
What had happened was he was as a number of people were. I think it's cruel, actually. A number of people were both in maintenance. Charlie Prust, who used to live in Newborough, there was a rule established around about 1980 where you couldn't be a manager in SEC unless you were a professional engineer.
Oh, okay.
And so a number of people who'd got to that level, because they were skilled and knowledgeable, never went any further.
Because they didn't have the academic
Didn't have a bit of paper,
acumen behind
which
them.
didn't apply in the private sector,
Yep.
frankly.
Yep. So they left? Did they
No,
lose
well,
that skill base, or were they moved aside?
Well,
or?
I just retired. So Frank had been SOE at Yallourn. I think from when Bert and me went to Hazelwood in the early 60s through till 1980. He was there 19 years or something like that as the operations engineer, and saw all these green, if you like, engineers sort of bypass him.
Okay.
So one funny story. When Frank left, this is about culture.
Workplace culture.
Workplace culture.
Yep.
So I remember one day one of the East Station plant controllers ringing Frank up and saying, "Oh, we got a vibration problem here, Frank. What do we do?" So Frank says, "Ignore it." So he raced out and told them to ignore it, okay, because there was a faulty vibration monitor. He left. Same thing happened. I rang them up, and I tried to be like Frank. I said something like, "Well, just ignore it. It's a faulty meter. The engineers have told me it's faulty." They refused to do it. They said, it's as though they've been waiting for Frank to leave for a dozen years. In other words, they followed the rules.
Okay.
They followed the rules, you see. So it shows you cannot be something, it's difficult to be something you're not.
Correct.
Because I'm not an autocrat, and couldn't be one, and they knew it.
So they followed the rules. Did they have a catastrophe, or was it all? Did it all settle?
Well,
out?
it genuinely was a mistake,
Yes.
but they followed the rules. The rule said if it gets to this level, you shut down. Similarly, we had in those days, these were the old boilers in C&D station. I think were the first plant to be fitted with dust monitoring devices.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And so the dust went over the limit. And Frank used to say, "Just ignore it. Who cares?" It wasn't that blasé, but you know what I mean.
Yes, that's correct.
Whereas I shut him down.
Followed the rules.
Yep, and said, if I tell you to operate it, I'm in breach of the Act, right? I'm in breach of the Act. And so are you. If you ignore what I tell you, just keep running it. I know we're state government controlled. It's a state government suing a state government authority, but the rules are quite clear. If you keep covering up for plant problems or monitoring issues, you're covering up for them. Let's fix the problem.
So you're saying that the operation of the power station is governed by a legislative act?
Well, yeah, there's environmental rules.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There's environmental rules.
I knew I assumed there would be environmental rules, but environmental acts are what governs the operation of the stations purely, or is there other acts that govern its operation as well?
Well, there's the market. So these days there's a market rules operating power stations, because producing electricity is not just producing megawatts; it's also producing frequency control
And profit.
and VARs, right? So you're producing it's got to operate at a certain frequency to have a stable system. So there's all sorts of rules about the electrical operation of the place. There's temperature controls on cooling towers. There is a whole bunch of environmental rules and licensing associated with operating a power station. There's all sorts of limits put in place for vibration control, because if vibrations are out of control, right, you could end up with a catastrophic failure.
Yes.
because the blades will interfere with one another, and the cylinder, the
And
shaft will end up through the roof.
and the cost associated to repairs of catastrophic failure like that is
Enormous.
yes.
Absolutely enormous.
I would imagine that those costs would ultimately flow on to the end user, the customer, if that happened. Is that not right?
No, so often it's a direct hit off the bottom line of the power plant.
Really? Okay.
But what we keep forgetting is, as I said, places were highly manned in those days. We were just entering an era of stricter environmental controls, which was a good thing. We were struggling to get 60% capacity factor at Yallourn W when I left in, what was that, 88. Now we're getting at Loy Yang, because I've been there recently, we're getting 92, 93% capacity factor.
Yeah, I have heard that.
That is, it's running 100% of its load 93% of the time.
Yep.
When I was there, we were getting something like 97%.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
And we're achieving we achieve those sorts of figures with significantly less people than we did under state ownership. We forget that a place like Hazelwood was built in, I think the first unit was commissioned in 1963.
Oh, okay.
Last unit was commissioned, I think, in 1970. They were only designed to operate 30 years. 30 years.
Yep.
So the place would have been shut down
2000.
in the late 90s.
Yeah. Yep.
Would have been shutting units down. It operated until 2017?
Yep.
Yallourn Power Station was a perfect example of that. I think East Station didn't even last 30 years. Didn't last 30 years. Yallourn W is now stage one at Yallourn W is now 50 years old. 50. Commissioned in 74, was handed over in 74 to the operators from the construction people.
So that's due to close down in 2028.
Yeah, and the widespread belief is that it will operate beyond that.
Correct, I've heard that.
That's the widely held belief.
Yep.
Luang A was built in, 84 was the first commissioned unit. I think it completed in about 1988 or something like that. That was due to run for 30 to 35 years. When it was privatised, it was designed to run until 2048,
and
which would have been 60 plus years.
That's commission. That's due to be closed in. Has it extended out to 2048?
2035, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Luang B, this is off the top of the head, is also proposed to continue until the 2040s. Because that was the last of the units, the last unit plant to be constructed in the Latrobe Valley. And so we had a long period ahead of us. And so if anybody's buying a power plant, you've got to borrow money. You borrow money to pay the debt.
Indeed.
And you need to operate it. So at the time you pay down some of the debt, you've actually got enough money to do so. And so operating a power plant ain't that easy anymore, because you've got to consider capital investment, which you borrow money for, maintenance. So if you're originally going to operate a power plant from till 2048, you actually spread the debt over the period to 2048. If you then decide, oh God, I'm only going to operate this plant until 2035, so take 13 years of its operation, right? 13 off its operation, you then have a different debt repayment profile. You don't invest as much money because today you were putting money into the plant to operate until 2048. You're now putting money into the plant so it operates only for, another 20 years, another 10 years from now, you're going to spend less money. I mean, it stands to reason. That's what businesses do.
Yes, particularly big infrastructure businesses like power generation.
And then, of course, you have some of these ideologues in the Victorian government say, it just goes to prove, thank God we invested in renewables because these plants are so unreliable. Well, they're unreliable because you made them unreliable. You created the climate where people don't actually want to run plants anymore. Classic was Port Augusta, Northern Power Station in Port Augusta. When wind power plants run, they have to run a lot of the time because wind's high. So they enter the marketplace at a very low price, or even less than zero on occasions. If you're trying to run up a coal-fired power plant at Port Augusta, how can you make any money if the pool price is extremely low because all of this renewables has got to run? They couldn't, they shut it down. They shut the plant, that's Alinta, shut the plant down at Northern because they couldn't make any money. And what's irrational about that?
Oh, nothing. If they're doing their forecasting and they can't make money out of it, that's just, what do they think? They're going to open it up to run backwards?
So
no. Are they going to invest in any sort of future development of power station around that area? No. That's common sense, really.
I know we're getting off the subject, but what was the subject?
What were some of the roles you did in your working career?
Yeah, so I ended up, I went to the 3M squad at Hazelwood, which was interesting. Every job took twice as long. Workforce was predominantly a construction workforce. Ex-Luang A. So they were used to high levels of overtime.
Okay.
We had lots of asbestos discovered.
Okay.
Even if it was tipped over the boiler from the top of the boiler. It was an industrial nightmare. It was the sharp end of the SEC. I managed my way out of that job in 12 months by reconfiguring it. I then became the deputy project manager at PLE, Plant Life Extension. 3M squad was a mobile maintenance squad.
Okay.
But because of their industrial performance at Hazelwood, nobody wanted them. And nobody wanted them for another reason. If you take people from another power station and take them somewhere else, they're reducing the opportunities for overtime at the host plant.
Of course.
So I then went to Loyang. I did some industrial relations type work for at least a year, extending the skills of the workforce, etc. We were in the process of reshaping the way the place operated. I don't think it was all that sensible, but that's what the organisation did.
So you have
under state control.
Power generation flowing through your veins.
And then I decided, well, I just get sick of getting put in these. I'm getting sick of being put in these nightmare sections like W Station at, 36 LTIs in maintenance in 12 months.
LTI being?
Lost time injury.
Oh, okay.
So I did some stuff like, my approach to these management jobs was not to get into micromanaging, was not to get into, designing the size of the nut to go into the turbo generator. It was to actually use the people I've got. It was to encourage people to develop projects and then get them financed. It was to manage the industrial relations and manage the people.
The people.
The people.
Not
that
the
was,
components.
That was what I'm about,
bits.
managing. So I spent a lot of time addressing some of the fundamental, on the hierarchy.
Yes.
Maslow's hierarchy. Some of the things like accommodation and stuff had not even been addressed because it was all about the engineering of the place. So I addressed a lot of that. So I tried to change the culture there. Went to 3M squad after that. Tried to change the culture there. Did, really. And then went to Loyang. And then I went to HR because at the 3M squad, they had a huge number of lost time injuries a year. Lots of people always off on sick leave.
Was that?
That was a disease of the organisation.
Okay, culture. Yeah, culture.
And so I then went to HR, did a lot of work on training, industrial relations. And then when the Kennett government was elected, we were going to corporatise, and we did in the beginning of 1995. It's a long time ago now, really.
There it is.
Yeah, a long time ago. It feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
1995, we were corporatised. New boards were appointed for all these places. I was in charge of environment and corporate relations. Okay. Volunteered for that. I knew something about politics and people, so I knew something about PR.
Perfect.
And so I was the PR guy, corporate relations person, through the sale process. And one of the reasons I survived is because I'd done some stuff that added to the value of the plant, added to the value of the sale. Like we had an accredited EPA licence. We'd put some first-class communications and strategic management tools in place to assist boards and management. So I survived all that. Then I was caught up with somebody recognised I was an engineer. And so I then...
Go on.
But with a strategic bent, like not into detail.
Yep.
And good at managing. I think I was pretty good at managing people, actually. I thought it was. And then I went to, became the sort of, I don't know, I looked after civil, environmental, government relations, comms, whole bunch of stuff. Looked after that for a few years. And then I went to become the general manager of power generation and environment and government relations from 2004 to 2008, when I went across as basically the general manager of human resources and corporate relations and environment and government relations. So,
wow.
So,
that's a big portfolio.
People say, well, it is. And so when I left, during that period, I was also the chairman of Gippsland Water from 2000 to 2007.
Okay.
I was on the Executive Council of the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry from 1999 until 2017. I was in a number of Masonic organisations. I did lots of stuff in the community. And people used to say to me, how do you do all this? How do you fit it in? I said, don't get involved
with the detail.
Detail.
Yes, I've heard you say that before.
And so use the managers you've got.
Yep.
What's a general manager for? If you're going to have to, what's a general management role? But to offer advice to your managers is to empower your managers to make decisions. It's to cascade the strategic plan of the organisation down to their level, so they know what they're paid to do. Let them get on with it.
Yes.
And my role is to, when you got a problem, when either you've got a problem you need help to fix, or I see there's a problem looming, we help to solve the problem together.
We sit down and brainstorm some sort of strategy.
So
or
my
intervention
role really was
go.
just helping people to solve their own problems.
Yep.
That's all.
That's great. Yep.
That's what I saw the role of a general manager is,
yep.
And participating in the executive team at the particular site you're at.
Yep.
So I never saw myself sort of getting involved in high-level decisions, yes. But, whether someone's not turned up for afternoon shift and what am I going to do about it? Well, that's not my problem. I'm not paid for that.
There's a manager for
that. There's a manager to do that.
Yep. And you do see that quite a bit where managers at a high level try to control every aspect of the organisation, and it's what do you call it? Fraught with danger. You can't do everything.
So I used to drive some of my peers and my boss probably, drive them to tears because they'd ring up and say, I'll just pick a stupid example. Why isn't the unit 200 megawatts and it's only at 100? I'd say, well, I don't know. I'm told it's the following reason.
Yep.
Right? I trust my people. That's what they've told me. Why don't you know? I said, well, I can go and I can go down and look at how many turns the bloody valve's at if you want me to. But people are doing their best. I've asked them to do their best. They're doing it. So that was my sort of approach, really.
Yeah, but on the floor, those people who are tasked with looking after that situation would be doing their best.
Absolutely. And in a place like Loyang, there's lots of industrial problems. There is in any organisation which has people in it. There's accidents, people getting injured. There's all sorts of emotional issues with people. There's concerns about the ethics. There's concerns about the industrial relations future. What's the security of our job like? And quite frankly, that's a large part of the concern of people in power stations. What's the job security like?
To this very day.
Correct. So I said, look, in many ways, some of you might not like to admit it, But we actually operate this place in a partnership with the employees. They might hate us. They might not trust us. They might be suspicious of our motives. But we share one strong value. What's that? We all want the plant to operate as best it can. That's what we want. And so we share, so we all focused on that. And to this day, when you talk with a group of ex-operators, they will talk about how the plant isn't going as well now as it was when they were there.
Yep. And
so they're very critical of the owners for not committing to the plant like they would, like we would.
Yep.
And so it's interesting. It's interesting to look at that, actually. No one likes to operate plant that's not performing or poorly maintained or not enough investment. They want to operate as best it can.
But that's the situation they find themselves in now, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the closing dates looming and closing dates being moved around and you know, one power plant's closing in 28 and now it's closing in 32 and we don't know about 32 and then there's talk and scuttlebutt back that's 28. That would be very disruptive for the staffing group now, today, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. No one would know where they are at. That'd be very unsettling.
So from my point of view, working in that environment might be seen to be, God, how'd you cope with all that? How many cigarettes did you smoke?
Yeah.
Well, I gave up in I'm struggling to remember when I gave up. So I gave up cigarettes and alcohol in 1989, around about then. About 35 years ago?
Yep.
I always found work to be exciting because there's a problem to be solved. And sometimes they're not all that difficult. I've never had, I don't think, a really hard problem. Because if you do some research, if you haven't got the answer, I'm not supposed to have all the answers anyway.
Correct.
So if you work with your people, if you, we had a terrible lost time injury rate at your lawn. So I took the people to the health and safety reps and we all went to a local meeting place and we had a discussion about how we're going to get there.
So you involved everybody in the section? Well, everybody.
Every level, yeah.
Brought them in for a discussion. And what that effectively had done, I'm imagining, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is give those employees ownership over this very important issue.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, what happened, the things that sort of strike out at me was you'd go to a meeting with the unions, for example, and somebody would be criticising management about our approach to health and safety. Still hear the same stuff today.
Yep.
And one of the health and safety reps, a union rep, got up, metal workers union. Oh, shit, no, that's not management's policy. That's mine. I participated in that. So we wrote our own policy for health and safety in our section, which had 500 people in it.
And that reduced the lost time?
Oh, absolutely.
That's amazing.
I reckon a lot of industrial accidents aren't really about, clearly some are, right? Poor working conditions or whatever.
Yep.
But a lot of them have got to do with an absence and sick leave rates are the same. I always thought industrial performance and lost time injuries and sickness, apathy in the work, all symptomatic of a culture that needs repair.
I agree with you there. And that'll lead on to this next question I'd like to ask you. How would you describe your experience of leadership, and what are good leadership qualities, and where do you find them? Because a lot of issues you've been speaking to have required some good leadership. We like to talk about leadership a fair bit. Yeah.
So who was my model? I didn't have one. I first got politically active in the 1960s.
So taking on a political active role, that's a form of leadership as well, isn't it?
Well, there was a issue in Newborough. I'm sure nearly everybody's forgotten. It was an issue about differential rates. And so I think there was some infrastructure to go in Newborough, and the area's councillors had voted in favour of a differential rate to pay for that infrastructure. I agree to this day that we all ought to pay for all the infrastructure in a particular area. Also applies in things like water authorities. Right? So there was a big campaign about 1968, and Avis Maud was elected as an independent candidate for the Maui City Council. And at the age of 16 or whatever, however I was, 17, I became vocal at meetings, because I thought to myself, well, I've got an opinion on this. I should let somebody know what that opinion is, even if it's stupid. I wasn't afraid to stand up and give them my opinion. Started handing out how to vote cards at the age of 16. Or was I 15? Anyway, 16. About Vietnam. Now I got some...
Before you could vote?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And so I handled the current affairs notice board at Lawn Tech when I was about 14. I got into trouble because I'd put all these anti-Vietnam War stuff up. It was a big topic in those days.
Yes, it was. It was a very big topic. There was a real turning of the tides. Late 60s, come the hippie culture, come the free love. It was also where oral contraception had kicked in, and women had been given control over conceiving. So that changed a lot of our culture. And then we went into the 70s, and we were all sitting in the middle of the war in the Middle East, which was an atrocious war that was beamed into our lounge rooms every night with the 6 o'clock news. So everyone had an opinion, was seeing firsthand what was going on there on a daily basis in Vietnam, and had an opinion on that war. So, yeah, that's where people come out in their droves, protesting in the streets.
I didn't form the view from what I read in the newspapers, because if I'd believed what I read in the newspapers, I would have supported the war.
Okay, so where'd the groundswell for the opposition for the support for the war come from?
Just reading about it, how it occurred, how the American government seems in many ways to create enemies.
Well,
because of domestic politics.
There's a lot of talk around the industrial military complex actually as a working profit-generating machine.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think anybody would even argue about it anymore.
Yeah.
But so I thought to myself, I can think for myself. I can work this out. I like it. And so I became sort of politically aware. I was saying to myself, if I'm not happy with what I see occurring, then do something. You can sit back and cop it. Oh, there's nothing I can do, they won't listen. Or you can actually do something.
I agree. And just getting out there and sitting on a seat and listening to the conversation that is going on around an issue that you're not really comfortable with is doing something.
Correct.
And it can be as simple as that. A lot of people get confused that, what can I do? I'm only one person. I can't do anything. There's a big, Goliath of a machine. Well, in point of actual fact, you getting out of your lounge room, going to the community group who's discussing something that's happening in your local area that they're not happy about, that bins aren't being picked up enough, or dogs are biting people in this, whatever it'll be, on whatever issue it is, you sitting there and listening to it and participating in that conversation is actually doing something.
Correct, and they don't have to bust your insides out.
No.
But it's just taking part.
Correct.
That's what I believe in, taking part.
And
I'm not saying to anybody, I'm a leader to choose me. I'm saying, I've got an opinion on this. I've got an opinion on this. I'm going to reflect that opinion somewhere else.
And that started in you in a very, very young age, obviously.
Yeah.
And carried over into your adulthood.
Yep, absolutely.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And
even when it was to my detriment.
And still to this very day, because you're very, very active even today.
Yeah. I've got this sense that I'm now nearly 74.
Years young, you forgot to put on the end of that.
So one of my roles is still to help people solve their own problem. Not to do it for them, but to help them to solve their own problem.
How would you go about that? How do you do that? How do you empower people to solve their own problem?
I'll give you a simple example. I won't mention any names, but I was at a Progress Club meeting yesterday. Okay. I was approached by a lady who said, somebody told me to come and see you. You're knowledgeable about things. I haven't received any ballot material for the property to vote in East Gippsland because, and I've got a property in Painesville, but nobody sent me any ballot material. I said, I think I've got a feeling, sort of question without notice, that absentee landlords were cleansed out of the electoral rolls.
That's right. I heard that too.
So let's check. So went on the system, checked whether, in fact, that property was enrolled to vote. It's not. Okay. I said, well, if you really want to know, just don't take my word for it. Here's the telephone number of the council. Ring them. They'll tell you straight away whether you're on the roll or not. Then you've got peace of mind. So I'm helping to solve that problem. And I like doing that. So I didn't sort of Google it and say, no, you're not enrolled, so go, yeah. No, it's about giving people peace of mind.
Yeah, indeed.
So that's a very simple example. And so we recently worked with forming Council Watch in the Latrobe Valley. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't do it so I could become the chair. Don't need to be chair anymore. My role is to give people advice.
And motivation.
Motivation, yeah. Not to do it, but to just give people the benefit of my experience around here for the last 70 plus years. I did the same when I was chair of Gippsland Water. That was an exciting job, actually. Miss that. I miss being in the water industry, actually. The water industry is fascinating. Fascinating. And what's fascinating about it is the regulatory environment, how much government control there is.
And the complexity, I dare say, to be very, very complex.
Oh, it's not complex. It's just there's lots of it, lots of bits and pieces. And so these days the price is established by the Regulator General. This is after the Regulator General, by an authority, the state government. You submit your plan for the next 5 years with a lot of economic analysis, and you then set your price based on that. And that's a lot of work.
That's the price that we're going to pay for water.
Correct. And water and wastewater services, yeah.
Right. That's to our front doors.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. That's huge. Because you're saying there's been a lot of surveys done on all the natural resources around this area. Like there isn't, I remember you were mentioning that there isn't a stone unturned in that.
I reckon one of your fellow your Law North residents, Russell Centre, great guy. Miss him actually. He was the scientist at Loyang, chief scientist really. He reckons Traralgon Creek must be the most studied waterway on the planet. That in itself is fascinating. How you distribute waste water from a power plant.
Well, yes.
And a mine.
Yes.
What about all that artesian water? Where does it all go?
Yes. What happens
Who owns it? Yeah, what's the regulatory environment surrounding all of that? That's all fascinating.
Because the old open cut mines are they have been suggesting that they're going to fill them up with water and turn them into aquatic recreational parks. But then again, there's some
do you need 3?
Well, again, and there's people coming out saying, where are we going to get the water from? Because we don't have the water to fill them. I don't know anything about that.
I'm not sure that we don't. Fill them over what time?
I don't know. But anyway, that's what they've been discussing, and they will be huge aquatic recreation facilities.
Well, we've already got one. So Lake Narracan, for example, which before it was Lake Narracan was the Yallourn Storage Dam.
Okay.
That was built in, I think it was finished in 59 or something. That was built as the pond, to create a pond from which to draw water for Yallourn E-Power Station. That was why it was built.
Okay. Specifically.
And then for Hazelwood. No, there's no role for Hazelwood in that one. And then when Loyang was constructed, Blue Rock Dam was created. So Blue Rock Dam water goes into Lake Narracan, which goes into the pond, which then goes via an integrated system, ends up at Loyang and Yallourn W. And then that had the ability to also feed Hazelwood. Hazelwood was basically fed with artesian water plus town water through Morwell. That was why Morwell. So there's all sorts of integrated systems operating here. And so we've got plenty. There's something, I think, 6 gigs of water in Lake Narracan. Each of the power authorities has water in perpetuity. So they would argue it's in their purchase price. They bought that water as part of the purchase price of the power station.
Okay.
So there's lots of water. However, the voids are very large. So it'll take, I know we drive past on my way back to Traralgon. I will see a lot of water in the Morwell open cut, but it's still only very, the higher you get, the greater its dimensions.
Yes.
So there's still there's a long way to go.
There is a long way to
fill
go.
that void.
Yes, because there is a lot of water accumulating in the Yallourn open cut. Because in our region we have a number of open cut mines.
Yep.
And Yallourn is starting to fill up too. But again, it's only minuscule. It's got a long, long way to go.
Now you started out here talking about leadership.
Yes.
Didn't really have a role model apart from my grandfather. That sort of faded in the early 60s. I used to like Arthur Caldwell because, he went down with the flag flying in 1966 election. So he lost it on principle, which was withdraw from the Vietnam War, end conscription. After that, I've just seen a lot of flawed characters, really.
So what motivated you to take leadership roles in the community and in your workplace? Was that just natural?
Sort of just happened.
And are leadership qualities natural or can they be learnt?
It's a very interesting question. I actually think some people are actually born with leadership personalities. In other words, it's part of their DNA that they will lead because they're consultative individuals. They're not autocrats. I've never been autocratic, never been interested in being autocratic. So it's part of my DNA. So, but I've at the same time, I've done an awful lot of supervisory and management training programs. So I think the answer is there are those of us who it's in our DNA to want to manage people and manage them well. My fundamental rule was, and it might seem simplistic, was I don't like being told what to do. So I'm not going to tell anybody else what to do. I don't tell people what to do. Right? I don't. Don't like telling people what to do. Because I don't like, it's a demotivator for me.
Yep.
Be told what to do. Particularly when it's accompanied by why. There's no answer for the word. Well, why are you telling me? Why is it so important? I don't lie. Right? I don't lie. It's part of my DNA. I don't lie. Like I remember the occasions when perhaps I didn't quite tell the truth. I remember them because I was under direct instructions to do something I didn't want to do, which then causes anxiety, as you know.
Correct. And stress.
So that's part of my fundamental principles. But some of the techniques you can actually learn. And so I think you can help people to become leaders, even if they don't see themselves as it, and other people might, or they probably don't have it, by actually modifying their behaviour.
I was speaking with a fellow yesterday, a good friend of mine, who is he was a lecturer with Macquarie University, and he has a doctorate as well. He's a doctor, and I was talking to him about leadership yesterday, and he said it should be delivered as a course, an educational course, at an undergraduate level, and that it isn't. He said it should be taken that seriously because leadership has been something that we all look for, and he's saying it's sadly lacking, and the university should actually develop a course.
Absolutely sadly lacking.
What? Yes, you said you did a number of supervising and leadership courses, which helped you, would have given you a mindset around leadership. What was there any sort of common themes in that? How do you teach leadership? Is what I'm trying to get at. How do you show people to lead?
Simple example. One of the things that stands out. I mean, I first watched the John Cleese stuff.
Oh yes.
Must have been late 70s.
How was that, besides hilarious?
What I started doing immediately, because I agreed with it, I would never use my desk as a barrier.
Oh, okay.
So turn the desk around so that when someone comes in, there's no desk between you and them. So you're meeting on equal ground, same level playing field. When I wanted to talk to them, this is particularly union guys, I sat next to them.
And that
to show that I wasn't using my power as a manager over them.
Yeah, levelling up playing field.
Yep.
Now,
if you want to intimidate people, that's a different story. Yep. I learned all the intimidation techniques, like, have a light shining above you so that when the person comes in and sits in front of your desk, which is a huge barrier, you have a light shining on them so they feel under the spotlight.
Yep.
I mean, there's all sorts of intimidatory techniques. I don't actually believe in them.
Yep. Tyrannical leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, see, that's the problem.
Subscribe to
Some people actually see that as leadership.
Yeah, no.
There's almost no common view when you deal with difficult people, they will spend hours convincing you what a great leader they are. When everyone else, including the people that work for them, reckon they're terrible.
Yes, correct.
So,
but also those people want that. If you are a tyrannical leader, you constantly have people plotting against you to ensure you fall, because they can't stand you. But if you are a leader that leads with, compassion's not the right word, but understanding and level playing fields, communication, honesty, fairness where you can, well, people walk by your side and they will lay down and die for you, actually.
So I did a few interesting things like, at Yellow and W, the work groups would have a meeting. So they'd have a meeting at 9:30, 10 o'clock. Have a discussion about something and then go home.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going home for? List a day's pay. So why don't you meet inside the gate? We'll find a building you can meet in. You can put your view to your members. I'll put the management view. And so it's a joint management union meeting. I'll explain my side. You can explain your side. And if the guys decide not to go home, that's good. Go back to work. If they do, at least they've had the opportunity to understand both sides of the argument. That was viewed very poorly by my managers, of course.
That was my next question. How was that viewed? Poorly, okay.
By industrial relations people didn't think it was too bad.
Yep.
But that's the way I tended to operate. Common sense.
Okay.
I tried to convince my managers that the reason being given for the guys going on strike or banning something for weeks and weeks on end, you can fix this in 5 minutes by doing this. No, not caving into those bastards.
Yep.
I'd go on. I remember I went on holidays once, came back 2 weeks later. They'd capitulated. Management had caved in using the same solution that I gave them 2 weeks earlier. But it was all about we're managers, we want management prerogative, we want manager. We're not going to be told we capitulate to those.
There you go.
I mean, it's all about, sometimes think, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but management in Essex got the unit. I mean, Latrobe Valley's always been criticised for being an industrial relations nightmare. Right?
Yep.
A polluted industrial relations nightmare is the Latrobe Valley. That was the belief sort of promulgated in Melbourne. And I think the management got the unions it deserved, quite frankly.
Oh, okay.
Because it was engineers. Good engineers were made managers.
Yeah, okay. When they were engineers, not managers.
Correct. And we always talk about this when I was a junior engineer. How the hell did he ever get to this job? He's a great engineer. Or how did this such and such become a supervisor? He was a great tradesman, but he's a terrible supervisor. And so it almost became if you're a great engineer, you became a manager. So I was a terrible engineer because I didn't really want to be one. My approach was quite different. And so I was going nowhere.
Because we see a lot of people holding managerial positions that aren't very good at it.
No.
And, that example you give, engineers being promoted into managerial positions, but they were good engineers but poor managers. Is that to actually create a career path for that industry specifically?
Yeah.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, for people to think, we'll employ a people manager to manage a bunch of engineers or manage a bunch of, and use any trade really, any sort of trade. But they go, oh, no, we can't do that. We have to have someone from the trade who understands it. Is that common sense, or is that like poor management?
I think you need to have some general understanding of what it is they're doing.
Good manager would tease that out of them.
Would tease that out of them anyway.
The team anyway.
I mean, it's often quoted that some of the best managers we've had locally were those who didn't really have much of a background in it.
But
they tended to work through their people then. They worked through their managers.
Yes.
They were good managers.
And utilised the skills they had within the team.
Correct. Yep.
And empowered those people to move forward.
Absolutely.
Without being shamed or ridiculed.
Or screaming at people or doing whatever.
Yep. Okay. And that's the style you adopted.
Absolutely.
Is that, you think that's the future of leadership for us?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about that.
Because as a society, we're getting a bit more
autocratic.
Yeah, and fragile. You know, I was reading somewhere that that is it the Z generation or the latest generation, born around 2000s, are one of the hardest group of employees to manage ever. Due to their sense of entitlement. So how is it?
But there are ways to manage that. How
would you manage that?
Well, the first person I would consult would be a psychologist. I do that now. I mean, we all have to deal with difficult people. I mean, one way of managing a narcissist, there's plenty of them.
Oh, I'd say we're almost in an epidemic. Not that that's a qualified opinion, that's just my opinion. I have no evidence, and not full-blown narcissists as diagnosed, but narcissistic tendencies we see a lot of in the community.
Well, you can manage that by exploding, right? You could.
You could.
You could manage it by going toe-to-toe.
You could.
I've seen that happen. You could manage it by understanding the behavioural traits of someone with that sort of personality. Like, not undermining the guy, but actually finding some level at which you can actually get what you want out of that relationship, and he does too.
Correct. And you can plan that out and make that as part of your strategic planning and implementation to achieve your mutual goal. You can do that easily.
Yeah.
Very, very easily.
And so what a narcissist will like, they've got some underlying issues about their own self-worth.
Yep.
So reinforcing their lack of self-worth is not a good way to operate. So you have to actually operate in a way that doesn't reflect on them personally. They're poorly.
Correct.
That they can take some, not pride's the wrong word, their sense of self-worth will be intact. They can take credit for it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you want something built and he's not agreeing with it because it doesn't suit him, then you find a way where he can take credit for the success of that. I'm just talking right off the top of my head now.
Oh no, I think. But I think,
and so you need to actually have a greater understanding of the people with whom you're working.
I tend to agree. And with narcissism, there's two types of narcissism: there's grandiose and introverted.
Yep.
The grandiose, they're out there, they're the alphas, so therefore you'd have to design your approach to suit that person and that personality. Or the introverted have low self-esteem,
and they will operate surreptitiously.
Correct.
Yep.
So therefore, you wouldn't have to, but it would be wise to design your intervention or your initiatives to suit those two personalities.
So we've come from a different society where, say before the war or immediately after it, everybody operated on the business of being told what to do.
Yep.
And were comfortable with it because you knew where your place was. You knew that all I got to do is hang around here for 20 years and I'll become a section head, I'll become a senior engineer, because that's what happens.
Yep.
However, changes in the education system, in communications, have meant that people ask, I'm not just going to do it because you told me to. Why? Why do you want me to do this? How important is it?
There has to be a rationale.
There's got to be a rationale, company. And we're probably, if you're suggesting we're actually transitioning to another societal culture.
Yes.
How do we adapt? How do we A, predict what that is, and B, manage it?
And show good leadership skills to move us all forward.
And then having learned those yourself, how do you actually transmit that learning to somebody else? Because not everybody's got the time or the money to actually go and consult a psychologist.
Mm. Yep. Yeah, I don't. Honestly, I don't think it's really that hard. But
I don't think it is either.
I got a bit of a different background. I'm seeing things through a bit of a different lens. We do need to identify within our working groups or our teams those that respond really well to some sort of supervision.
Mm-hmm.
I know everybody doesn't like being told what to do, but some people really need to be supervised, almost micromanaged, and they can perform well like that. And we have to identify within our team who can operate with minimal amount of supervision and let them go, because those people, those personality types, would have the propensity to be really creative and to be able to deal with, be really good with problem solving.
When I think about it, as an engineer, I did social science, right?
That's unusual. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
enjoyed that.
Yep.
I did my first sort of management training at sort of 21, 22, like introduction to supervision or something.
Yep.
There was not much about, I think I got the values training introduced into the SEC. I used to bang on about it all the time. The example I used to use was, you say a guy from South Africa who's been working in, a white guy from South Africa, he's been working in the Joburg, right?
Yep.
Different society. So you bring him out here and you don't put him in charge of a bunch of Aboriginals necessarily, but you know what I'm getting at.
Correct.
Well, he's been brought up in a different culture.
Very much
and
so.
You need to recognise that when you actually... So you need to understand what his values are.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So there's you don't want to take the risk of putting people into the wrong job.
Yep.
And so when I think about it, we need to be exposing people to leadership training almost as early as possible.
I agree.
As early as possible. So not just, in fact, in schools. It shouldn't really be. I mean, how much stuff do you got to read about bullying and on social media?
Well, we're not trained very well to deal with bullies.
We're not trained at all.
And there's a clear link between bullying in schools and youth suicide.
So it needs to be done in schools, so that asking those sorts of questions, recognising behaviours which are difficult, needs to be almost part of the way we operate.
I tend to agree. Can I run this by you for a second? I tend to see in our community a propensity to avoid leadership for fear of being held responsible or being, let's say, kicked up the bum.
Attacked on social media.
Well, that's part of that. That's part of that retribution that I'm talking about. Do you see that as well? So therefore, people would prefer to step back from taking a leadership role
and be anonymous,
or going forward. Yes, moving forward, and they tend to hide for fear of that ridicule or fear of that retribution.
That's how there's a problem in business. I say certainly in political life. And who'd want to be a councillor anymore? Used to be a pillar of the community, being a councillor.
Yeah, correct.
That's how it was regarded.
Yep.
It's like used to be a pillar of the community, being a bank manager.
Yes.
Or the local minister.
Yes.
But that's a previous era.
Yes. So who's the pillar of our communities now?
It's a very good question. Who are they?
I don't know.
I don't know either. It used to be the head of a local. It used to be the senior business person in the town, like the head of Law Yang. Ian actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he took a large role. Ian Nethercote took a large role in community and industry affairs. But I think there's a reluctance now to do that.
I just read a book by Simon Hammond. He's a fellow that's had a number of advertising agencies in Victoria over the past 30 years. And he states that our heroes and our leaders of the future are going to be those who stand up and speak the brutal truth, regardless of whether that's what people need or want to hear. It may very well be what they need to hear. And I think there's a hesitancy to speak the brutal truth.
Oh, absolutely, for fear of being accused of being politically incorrect, fear of being attacked.
Yes.
In local media, particularly social media, where much of it can be done anonymously.
Yes.
Which I think is the lowest of the low, actually, to use anonymity on social media, even false identity, anonymous, and just outright just attack people. I think that's ethically barren to do that, but that's what's happening. And so, why would you actually? Well, a lot of people say, "I'm not prepared to subject myself to that," even though we all know it's rubbish.
Yes, rubbish.
It's rubbish.
Yep.
A lot of lies being told, but nobody wants to go through that. So I'd rather just, go on holidays or, live my life and not worry about all this stuff. In the meantime, your actual life, the way you live your life, the way you pay your bills, the way you earn an income, the way you participate in society, the way you go on holidays, is all being impacted by, quite frankly, a lot of idiots in many cases.
Yep.
People less qualified than you are.
Yes.
Because we all think, dare not ask that question. Somebody will think I'm stupid. Well, here's a tip. They won't.
Yes.
Because most of the time they haven't got the answer either.
Yes.
That's the reality.
And they'd like to see the answer to that question.
Yeah.
But they're too scared to ask it.
There is no stupid. I mean, it's a bit trite to say this. There is no stupid question.
Yep. Except they say, except the one you don't ask.
Yep.
That's silly.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's why I like participatory democracy. Actually, I see nothing wrong. In fact, I welcome it. Quite frankly, as a principle, people getting together in communities and saying we don't like what's going on here.
Yes.
That's seen by some of the political parties as threatening behaviour. Well, it's not threatening behaviour to them. They might see it as a threat, but it's people just expressing a view. What's wrong with that? That's good.
Absolutely nothing. And the old associations or progress associations in communities used to do that exact thing.
Absolutely.
They would stand up and ask questions. But I think that initiative or that format has disappeared. And now people don't know how to ask questions.
Well, I used to ask. I asked this question 20 years ago. Actually, I was offering advice to a candidate. Actually, well, more than 20 years ago. Actually, offering advice to a candidate for Parliament who'd been an MP. Actually, why don't we hold public meetings anymore?
Good question.
I remember when I stood for Macmillan, I had a public meeting in Kernet Hall in Yallourn. It was sort of before it was pulled down. I think we got 600 people in it. That's what we used to do. People don't do that anymore. Well, they might if there's something worth going out for.
Well, there is a bit of a groundswell in the area for those community gatherings to come together.
Yeah.
And watch out for that because that's going to have a bit of a groundswell going on because people are frustrated and people are looking for avenues to get answers. And as we said before, just turning up, sitting on a seat is leadership unto itself and you're participating in the conversation just by listening.
And I don't need choreographed questions. I mean, it smells bad when you've got to submit your questions in advance.
Yes, it does.
I'm happy just to turn up anywhere and people can ask anything they like. I'm not a candidate or anything, by the way, but
Yep.
it was my view. People say, oh, you're winging it again. Well, I'm not. If I go in there with, prepared answers, I should be reasonably skilled enough to cope with anything.
But that also displays a degree of honesty and if
I don't know, tell them I don't know.
Yeah, well, basically, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
I don't know is a good answer.
Yeah.
And don't ever be ashamed of it.
Nope.
Because we can't know everything.
No, we can't.
Really? Anyway, all right. Listen,
We've probably got through the second of 5 questions.
yes, we we certainly have. I've got another question here. I don't know whether to ask it or not.
Do you want me to come back and do another one?
Look, that'd probably be a good idea. We should do that.
Because this has gone for an hour and a half.
It has gone for a bit long. We'll have to make two out of this, but and we'll do that. We might wrp that up there then. Richard,
I enjoyed this.
thank you very much for coming along.
You've been exploring some of my personal philosophies.
I think we see eye to eye on a number of topics, Richard, and that's probably why we get on so well. All right, we'll finish that up today. Thank you very much for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure.
That was wonderful.
I like talking too.
Yeah, good. I like that too. You take care out there, everyone, and you can find us on social media. And yes, we look forward to you look forward to another instalment from the High Road. Thank you. Bye bye.